Previously on Murder at the U.
Everybody was looking for him. Where's Rashaun?
If you're asking me point blank, do I think that he did it? The answer is no.
I'm telling you, I had nothing to do with him dying. Nothing.
Just days before the trial of the state of Florida versus Rashaun Jones was set to start, the judge held a hearing in her courtroom. Rashaun Jones was there with his attorneys, and so was the prosecution.
If I had a crystal ball, I would be able to tell you which way this case was going to go, but I don't. I often believe cases are going to go one way and they go the other, and vice versa.
Judge Christina Miranda, the woman who would preside over this trial, had something important that she wanted to tell Rashaun.
There was a lot of information that had come in as tips, as potential ideas of other people that might have committed this offense, and most all of it is being excluded.
Judge Miranda had ruled that the bulk of the alternate theories about who might have killed Brian Padda would not be admissible in court. She decided they were either hearsay or irrelevant. So the nightclub fight with gang members, Jada Brody's twin brother, word of an alleged hit on Brian, all inadmissible. What this meant is that the defense attorneys who were trying to prove that Rashaun didn't kill Brian couldn't bring up any of these theories as they fought this case. And the jury would never learn any of this. Instead, the only version of the story the jury would hear was the one where Rashaun allegedly killed Brian. Then, Judge Miranda addressed Rashaun directly. She reminded him of the potential sentence he could be facing if he was convicted.
It's life in prison.
Yes. Life in prison with a 25-year minimum mandatory.
That means I have to sentence you to life, and that means life. That means you don't get out. That means you come out in a pine box. That's the only way out.
Judge Miranda had just told Rashaun the only way he'd get out of prison would be in a coffin. It seemed like she was encouraging him to consider a plea deal. The state had offered Rashaun 15 years, with credit for the 5 years he'd already spent in jail. That sentence would be lower than the one he'd face if he was convicted of second-degree murder at trial.
I would rather you find some sort of fairness and the victims find some sort of fairness and justice in this case without having to roll the dice in a trial. Have you had time to think about that? Or do you want time to think about that?
I had time to think about it, you know.
Okay. And what is your position? What are you thinking?
Deep down in my heart, I know I'm innocent. So that means I got to go to trial to prove my innocence.
Rashaun insisted he was innocent and that he wouldn't accept the plea offer.
Well, that's up to you.
I'll be willing to go there.
Then the judge decided to do something that we all found interesting. She started to bargain. It's something she said she does with all her defendants.
Is there something that you thought of that maybe you would be able to do it?
At this point, Your Honor, with all due respect to everyone that's involved, dismissal would be the only thing I would willing to accept.
Yeah, they're not going to do that. I thought you were saying you've already done 5, so something along the 5 might be something that you were willing to accept.
Rashaun held firm. He didn't want to take a plea deal. He said he would rather go to trial and stand before a jury. The Padda family also wanted their day in court. In the lead-up to the trial, producer Dan Arruda went to Edwin Padda's house outside Miami.
Danny, what's up, bro?
There he is.
How you doing, man?
How are you, man?
Good.
Great to see you.
Waiting for everybody else to get here.
Brian's siblings and their mom, Jeanette, were gathering for a family dinner at Edwin's house. Inside, Dan spoke to Brian's brother, Fednall.
How are you feeling about this trial coming up?
Man, to be honest with you, I'm glad it's finally here. I just, want closer for my mom, Right now, she's up and down.
By now, Jeanette was 74 years old. Her medical issues had made talking difficult, so her daughter Ronette spoke for her.
She's been waiting for this for a long time. Mm-hmm. And just the other day, she stopped for a moment and she put her head down and the tears started to flow. And she said, "Do you think we're going to win?" And I said, only God has that answer.
We spoke earlier about this being a very circumstantial case. And there's a chance that a jury listens to all this evidence and can't get to a guilty verdict. Is that a possibility that you guys have considered?
I've thought of it. I don't like to think of it. At the end of the day, I just always think about my mom, you know. She's the one that's suffering with a broken heart along with her children. Like, I think about her, like, having to hear of the outcome of what she didn't expect, you know. How much more damage will it do to her? That's what I think about. That's what hurts me the most.
Here, Jeanette spoke up.
I have to get his justice on for Brian. Okay.
Yeah, she wants justice for Brian.
Nearly 2 decades after Brian's murder, Rashaun Jones would face a jury of 6 people. The question for us: would police and prosecutors be able to paper over 20 years of mistakes, inaction, and scandal and get a conviction? Or would Rashaun's defense attorneys create enough reasonable doubt to convince a jury to let him free? I'm Paula Levine. From 30 for 30 podcast, this is Murder at the U, Episode 7, Gut Feeling. There were moments working on this story where we questioned if we would ever make it to the day when someone would stand trial for the murder of Brian Patta. But in February 2026, that day finally came. A mix of family members, former teammates, press, and law students descended upon the courthouse in downtown Miami. After 4 days of jury selection, testimony was set to begin.
All rise.
Good morning.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Thank you. You may be seated.
Good morning, Judge.
The tension among the defense, the prosecution, and even the judge was impossible to ignore. It was no secret that the lawyers on the two sides didn't like each other. But even aside from that, they all seemed on edge. Inside the courtroom, the Patta family filled up the first 2 rows of seats. They sat right behind the prosecution. Later in the trial, Rashaun's mom would also make an appearance, sitting behind the defense. Dan and I attended every day of the trial. We'd listen to the day's events, crowded in with other reporters, and then we'd debrief each night.
And I am rolling.
Okay. On that first day of scheduled testimony, Dan and I expected opening statements. But what we got was entirely different.
It is February 15th, day 1 of...
Wait, no, it's not.
It's not
17th.
February 15th? Good God. That's a good start. It's February 17th. It was supposed to be day 1 of Rashaun's trial today. That didn't really happen. What happened this morning, Paula?
Oh my God. The defense wanted to talk about some evidence. And I thought at first it was going to be something easily dispensed with. And then when they brought up the ICE agent, we knew that this was not going to be resolved quickly.
All right. Anything else you all want me to address?
Yes, Judge, there's one additional issue. So this goes to the court's ruling excluding the confession of Wilner Yacinthi. Wilner Yacinthi is a known hitman, and he confessed to the crime. The court excluded any reference to that cross-examination on that, anything related to that.
Right off the bat, even before the jury was brought in, the defense had come in hot with some new evidence. It was more detail about another theory of who killed Brian Patta, a theory that could help the defense challenge the prosecution's version of events. It turns out an alleged hitman from Haiti named Wilner Yacinthi had apparently confessed to Brian's murder just weeks after the shooting. An informant relayed the confession to an immigration and customs enforcement agent.
The ICE agent in his report says that this person is wanted for illegal entry and murder. He says he's wanted for murder.
And ICE informed the Miami-Dade police of this tip back in 2009. But records we found during our reporting showed that the only thing Yacint had confessed to was recently shooting someone with a .38 caliber gun, a gun of the same type that police believe could have been used in Brian's murder. The alleged confession was so vague, we didn't include it in this series. Especially because when we asked the police about Yacint, they said he'd likely died in the 2010 earthquake in Haiti. But now, this alleged suspect was back. And as it would turn out, the tip ICE had received about him was more credible than we'd thought.
So now we have a specific statement linking that confession to the murder of Brian Patta. But the confession was, I just killed that kid from the University of Miami. I get paid to perform hits. According to these reports, the hitman was involved in a gang that originated in Miami-Dade County. Based on sort of context clues and additional research we've done, it was a Haitian gang that originated in Miami-Dade County in the Little Haiti area. And going back to the fight that happened at Club Life, those were also individuals who were affiliated with a Haitian gang in the Little Haiti area.
And we find out that it was so specific that Wilner Yacint allegedly told this confidential informant that he killed Brian Patta by name.
This tip was clearly real. It clearly needed to be investigated, and it was not by MDPD.
Not only was the tip credible, ICE had information that Yacint might be living in Georgia in 2011, which contradicted what the police had told us, that he'd likely died a year earlier.
ICE was actively reaching out to the Miami-Dade Police Department saying, hey, this guy, we have information that he is in Marietta, Georgia, and he wasn't able to get in touch with anybody and then was bounced back between different police departments. They were giving him the runaround, like he said, and there was no follow-up by the Miami-Dade Police Department or any Florida law enforcement agency as far as we're aware.
It is just shocking that they did not take this tip after a federal agent who had been working in the field said multiple times, this comes from a reliable source. This is someone who had been a law enforcement officer, who had been working confidential informants, who knew the Haitian community and all of that, coming forward and saying, I think this has merit, and making an effort to do it. And you don't take that and run with it. It's like a blurb in the police report. And it is the last entry that they have. Not like we needed any more signs that the police dropped the ball on this, but today was just epic in terms of how poorly a job they did investigating this.
So that's something that should have been followed up on. We want to be able to show leads that were not sufficiently investigated, sufficiently followed up on, and this is a lead that ties back to a number of other pieces of evidence that the officers had in this case.
Ultimately, even with all of this, Judge Miranda ruled the ICE tip inadmissible. She called it double hearsay. Yacint's alleged confession had been made to an unidentified confidential informant, who then told the confession to an ICE agent. In the end, Judge Miranda would consider admitting this as possible evidence only if the defense had the alleged hitman himself, which they didn't. Yacint's whereabouts were unknown. And so, yet another theory that could help acquit Rashaun wouldn't get in front of the jury. One day later, the testimony officially began.
Okay, it is Wednesday, February 18th.
Over the next several days, we heard hours of testimony.
It is the 1-2-3rd day of state's testimony?
Testimony from many of the people we interviewed while reporting this story.
He was like, boy, you might as well go ahead and clip up.
Willie told me that he couldn't get in touch with Rashaun, and I was scared he was dead.
I hopped out of the car, and I was like, yo, stop playing.
The state tried to establish that Rashaun had a gun by calling two former teammates, Dave Howell and Kareem Brown. Dan had talked to them both back in 2018, but neither had told us anything about Rashaun having a gun. They shared something different at trial.
And can you tell the jury what the gun looked like?
It was a black gun. It was a revolver, smaller caliber. It was a snub barrel.
Not only did Dave say he had seen Rashaun's gun, But he'd said it was a revolver, the type of gun police believe had killed Brian. And when Kareem Brown, the other teammate, took the stand, he went one step further and told jurors that Rashaun made reference to having a .38.
He said, "Big bro, you know I got that .38. You know I keep that .38 on me." And I kind of just looked at him like, "Where is this coming from?" And we just continued walking.
What did you understand him to mean by that?
38 meaning a firearm.
And I think what the defense was trying to argue, because Rashaun's number was 38. So I think the defense was trying to insinuate that by saying, "I always got that 38 on me," that he was referring to his playing number.
The defense also pushed back by pointing out that Dave Howell and Kareem Brown are now police officers and friends of the Pata family.
The only two witnesses in this case who say anything about Rashaun with a gun, which is directly contradicted by the other witnesses, both police officers now.
They didn't say explicitly what they meant by that, but we took it to mean that the two men would want to present a story that helped the prosecution. For the Pata family, the trial was extremely emotional, and some of it was hard for them to watch. When the state showed the jury crime scene photos, Brian's siblings didn't want their mom to see them. As they pushed her wheelchair into the hallway, we could hear her saying she wanted to stay. At another point, after the prosecution played the audio from the 911 calls, Jeanette called out Rashaun's name. Brian's sister Renette covered her mother's mouth, and the siblings escorted her out of the courtroom. Ultimately, the prosecution's case rested heavily on one man, the eyewitness Paul Connor. The former University of Miami writing instructor said he'd seen a man he later identified as Rashaun leaving the Colony Apartments the night Brian was killed. Because Connor currently has memory problems, prosecutors played a video of when he testified in that bond hearing in 2022.
Good afternoon, sir. Please introduce yourself to the judge. My name is Paul Connor.
We did expect to hear some of Connor's recorded testimony, but there was one detail we didn't think the prosecution would bring up.
And is this a fair and accurate representation of the sketch that was created based upon your representation? Yes.
Interesting thing is as they're talking to him about what did you do next, he talks about sitting with a forensic artist. And this is where I was surprised, because I did not think that the sketch that was generated from Paul Connor's description was going to make it into the trial, but it did.
Well, I think if the state hadn't put it in, the defense would have.
Yeah, because when we've all seen the sketch and looking at photos from Rashaun, then it's not like a dead ringer, right?
No, not dead ringer by any means.
And right at that point, like, it seemed like Rashaun's attorney sort of nudged him and made him look straight at the jury.
Right.
Because, yes, it's been 20 years, but like it's I think it'd be hard for them to even envision that guy in front of them ever looking like that sketch. The sketch also highlighted another issue that didn't come up during that initial hearing where Paul Connor had testified. Connor was a white witness IDing a black defendant. In the legal world, this is called cross-racial ID. There's considerable evidence that cross-racial identification is unreliable. People tend to have own race bias, which means they're better at remembering faces within their same race. And that bias can lead to eyewitness misidentifications or, worse, a wrongful conviction. And so, when you look back at that sketch, the sketch that's supposed to be Rashaun but doesn't really look like him, it's hard not to think about context. But sketches also often aren't great, a mix of bad memory and the skill of the artist. In this case, the police had a stronger ID, much stronger. Paul Connor had picked Rashaun's photo out of a lineup. I do think with the jury, the fact that, yes, the sketch is whatever it is, the fact that he picks him out of a lineup, that is the thing to overcome. There's a lot of right, as the one. And so there's a lot of ways you can chip away at that, but that still is the most powerful thing the jury has heard this entire time.
I think it's really the only real evidence, the only direct evidence, right? Everything else is still circumstantial.
Yeah.
This is the only direct evidence that they've got and that they're going to have.
One piece of evidence that didn't come up at the trial was the heated phone call that teammate Chris Zellner said he overheard in the locker room. The one where Brian told someone to come see me just hours before he was killed. Instead, a detective testified that the police never got records for one of Brian's cell phones, so we may never know if that call really happened or who Brian was talking to. What we do know from Rashaun's call logs is that there is no record of him calling Brian that afternoon. On the last day of testimony, the state called an expert in cell phone forensics to analyze the location data from Rashaun's cell phone. But the cell tower evidence was inconclusive. Since Rashaun and Brian lived so close together, the cell data couldn't place Rashaun at the scene of the crime. And so, later that day, the state rested its case.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, the state has rested in our case. I'm going to turn to the defense and ask them if they'd like to call our first witness.
And here's where something happened that none of us saw coming. The defense, who could have called former Detective Miguel Dominguez to the stand, or Jada Brody, Brian's girlfriend, or so many other people, chose to call no one.
At this time, the defense rests.
Okay.
I almost didn't even hear it, but as soon as the state rested, they said the defense rests, and I think I was sitting, I was like, did I hear that right?
Shocking.
Absolutely shocking.
Shocking.
Yeah. In a criminal trial, the burden of proof is on the prosecution. In the best-case scenario, this was the defense's way of taking a knee, betting they already had the jury on their side. And so, both sides moved toward closing arguments. The state went first.
Brian Patta was a senior at the University of Miami. He had everything going for him. He was about to hit the NFL draft. The season was coming to a close. He'd switched positions. His draft stock was rising. One of the top agents had just called him. Everything was going Brian Patta's way. On November 7th of 2006, that dream ended because of the jealousy of this man over here, the defendant, Rashaun Jones.
And then it was the defense's turn. Rashaun's attorney, Christian Maroney, addressed the jury.
Two things can be true at once. The death of Brian Patta was an absolute tragedy. Rashaun Jones is not responsible.
With his last words to the jury, Maroney focused his energy on dismantling what Paul Connor thought he saw.
Paul Connor said that he is nearsighted and he's farsighted. He has to wear glasses for distance and he has to wear reading glasses up close. Not only were the conditions poor, but the time between whenever he saw this person and the actual being shown the lineup was 7.5 months. 7.5 months. Members of the jury, if you saw a person for 1 to 2 seconds at night and you were asked to accurately pick a photograph of them 7.5 months later, would you be able to do it? Another factor that you're going to be instructed to consider is whether the identification, the selection was cross-racial, whether the person selected and the witness are of different races. Why? Because it's difficult to identify someone of a different race. Paul Connor is a white man from Kentucky who's been in Miami for 3 years, and Rashaun Jones is a black male.
And then Rashaun's attorney did something we'd all remember later. He took that sketch, the one an artist had made based on Connor's description of who he'd seen the night of Brian's murder, and held it in front of the jury.
Does this look anything like Rashaun Jones? Does this look anything like Rashaun Jones? Nothing. There was no direct competition between Brian and Rashaun Jones. Not the type of competition that can drive someone to commit a homicide. Let's break this down. The government's theory of prosecution in this case is that Rashaun Jones failed his second drug test. Not his first drug test, where this is the first time that this has happened and this is a new thing that he's dealing with. Not his third drug test, where he's now going to get kicked off the team. He failed his second drug test. And he has such a break He's so upset that he failed his second drug test that he shoots his teammate in the head. Does that make any sense, members of the jury? Does that make any sense at all?
There is a window between closing arguments and the start of jury deliberations for lawyers to bring up evidence that the judge had excluded. It's a chance for the defense to lay the groundwork for a future fight in case Rashaun was convicted and they wanted to appeal. And so Rashaun's team brought up another one of the many Joneses in this case, Emmanuel Jones, the guy from way back when who'd allegedly confessed to killing Brian.
I was nowhere around no murder. I don't know anything about no murder.
But Judge Miranda warned the defense that if Emmanuel Jones made it in, so would evidence given by another Jones, George Jones.
He's like, I went to talk to the dude. We got in an argument, and man, the next thing I know, he's on the ground.
One alleged jailhouse confession by Emmanuel Jones pointed away from Rashaun. That would be good for the defense. But George Jones' testimony pointed to Rashaun, which would be better for the state. At this, one of Rashaun's attorneys fired back.
There's a lot of issues involved with that jailhouse snitch. Information that was fed to him by Detective Segovia.
Excuse me?
Yes.
Where?
Indeed.
Based on what?
Indeed.
Okay, this is
Rashaun's attorney had just accused the Miami-Dade police of essentially manufacturing Rashaun's alleged confession to George Jones. Assistant State Attorney Christina Diamond was aghast.
Don't say things you weren't present for and don't have any evidence of.
We asked for the tape.
Peabody, maybe we should take a 5-minute break so that she can take a breath.
Not just me. Am I the only one here?
Yes, everyone out, including you. Out. Out.
For a moment, Dan and I felt like we were back in middle school or in the audience at the Jerry Springer show. Of course, none of those 6 jurors, the ones waiting in the deliberation room who would determine the outcome of this trial, had watched this unfold. They were already tucked away, poised to begin their part in all of this. Because this trial wouldn't be over until there was a verdict that would rely on those 6 people unanimously agreeing on whether or not Rashaun Jones killed Brian Patta. What could go wrong?
She was not in a place where it was going to happen. She wasn't engaged. At that point, she stopped engaging with us altogether.
Coming up, we go inside the jury room.
So it's 6:37. My understanding is that the jurors have decided that they want to come back on Monday. So I'm going to bring them out.
Judge Miranda gave the jury one day off. It was a Friday. For Dan and me, it was a very long weekend of waiting.
I couldn't help but have a massive pit in my stomach over the weekend. Just playing out what could happen, what is probably going to happen. We're going to see a lot of pain in that courthouse. That stayed with me because it's something that we always knew might happen. But I think once the trial started, I thought, no, it'll be fine. This family will probably get some sense of justice. But I'm not sure that's going to happen now. Okay, I'm recording. It is Monday, March 2nd. It feels like 2065. What happened today, Paula?
The news that came out was not good for anyone.
All rise.
All right, thank you. You may be seated. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I've received your note indicating that you continue to be deadlocked, and so at this time I will declare a mistrial and a hung jury. Ladies and gentlemen, I wish to thank you for your time and consideration.
After 2 decades of waiting for a trial, 5 days of testimony from more than 20 witnesses, and 7 hours of deliberations, it had all ended with a hung jury. A mistrial was a devastating outcome for both sides. It meant everything would go back to square one. No resolution for the Pattas, no answer for Rashaun Jones. Just the possibility of another trial. In the meantime, Rashaun would be going back to jail. Dan and I looked around the courtroom. We saw Jeanette Patta looking down with her head resting on her hand, crying. Her daughter Ronette tried to comfort her. Well, the family immediately exited the courtroom. The defense stayed put.
Tell me about the defense team, how they were feeling and what they did after the hung jury was read.
They looked shell-shocked, really. A lot of animated talking between Rashaun and some of the attorneys. At one point, they were all holding hands in a circle. It appeared as if they were in some sort of reflection or prayer or something like that. It was a very solemn moment. And then there was a moment when, and I think this was probably the hardest moment for that team, was when the corrections officer took Rashaun back and was taking him back into the jail. I had questions, like why did the jury give up after only 7 hours of deliberation? What pieces of evidence were the most compelling? And why hadn't the jury been able to come to a unanimous decision one way or the other? We immediately began reaching out to the jurors by text, email, even LinkedIn messages. We wanted to find out what had happened inside that deliberation room. And eventually I got in touch with a few members of the jury. One juror told me that the jury wasn't evenly split. In fact, just the opposite. They had voted 5-1 against convicting Rashaun.
We just think the state hadn't proved their case.
I later interviewed this juror on the phone. The juror wanted to remain anonymous, so this is the voice of an actor.
In order for us to get there, we had to make a lot of assumptions. We didn't feel like we should be making those assumptions that the state needed to prove their case. There were so many gaps in the evidence that we needed.
So I asked, what were the pieces of evidence they would have needed to hear?
For some of us, the Jada thing was a gap. If this gentleman injected himself in the relationship, they could call Jada and help us understand what that was and the conflict between her boyfriend and this gentleman. For me, I needed to hear from Jada.
I asked the juror about Paul Connor, the University of Miami instructor who identified Rashaun out of a lineup.
All of us believe Paul Connor. We don't believe he lied about what he heard or what he saw or that he thought he saw this person. The challenge that we had was that he looked at the football pictures. He attended the games. He ate in the cafeteria. We could not ignore the possibility that he saw him on campus. None of us understood why they waited 7.5 months to do the lineup. That didn't make sense. He's not going to remember in what setting he saw him.
The prosecution's theory of the case was that after failing his second drug test, Rashaun decided to take out his anger and jealousy on Brian by killing him. For this juror, that story just didn't make sense.
I just don't buy the mental break either. This wasn't the first suspension, and this wasn't the last. I couldn't connect the dots. Maybe I don't understand the human mind and why people do evil things. It was hard to comprehend how someone could wake up someday, have some news that was of their own making, and decide to kill someone else.
The jury hadn't been allowed to hear about all the shortcomings and mistakes of the Miami-Dade police that we've detailed in this series. But even still, this juror said they were unanimous on one point.
We all did feel the Miami-Dade Police Department did a horrible job with this case.
Ultimately, the juror felt like the Miami-Dade police had failed Brian's family.
I feel bad for this man's family. They've been waiting on justice for so long, and you present a case that is all circumstantial. I just expected to see more.
When the jurors returned on Monday to continue deliberating, they talked through all the evidence of the trial, and they ended up 5-1, with one juror wanting to convict.
This juror was concerned about him not going to the meeting, and she just couldn't get past the fight over Jada. She really felt that was significant. Once that occurs, she felt like he didn't get over that, and he held that grudge for a long time. When he got the news he failed his second drug test, she felt that he snapped.
That one juror held firm, and nothing the other jurors could say would change that juror's opinion.
She was not in a place where it was going to happen. She wasn't engaged. At that point, she stopped engaging with us altogether.
Sounds like Rashaun came very, very close to walking out those courtroom steps today a free man, except for one person.
Right. Over the next several days, I tried every way I could to get in touch with the one holdout juror. I never heard back. But here's what another juror told me over text.
What is frustrating is that the only juror who didn't want to change her mind, her reason was, quote, gut feeling. My heart is telling me he's guilty. The second time we went back to the jury room with instructions from the judge, she just kept reading her book and said, I'm not going to repeat myself. So we all decided to tell the judge we were done.
Now, juries are supposed to reach a verdict based on evidence, not on their feelings. In fact, that's what Judge Miranda explicitly told the jurors before they began their deliberations.
This case must be decided only upon the evidence that you have heard from the testimony of the witnesses and have seen in the form of exhibits in evidence and these instructions. This case must not be decided for or against anyone because you feel sorry for anyone or are angry at anyone.
For Rashaun's lead attorney, Sarah Alvarez, the news about the jury cut both ways. They had come so close to an acquittal, but they had failed to convince one juror. That left the defense team trying to figure out what they would do differently in a retrial. I spoke to Alvarez outside the courtroom.
There's no perfect way or no one way to try a case, especially given the way that this played out. I'm glad that we didn't ultimately call witnesses, because if this juror was holding out because of a gut feeling, I don't know how much that would have done. So we'll have to wait and see how it goes for the second trial. I don't want to put too much, strategy out there.
We reached out to the state attorney's office several times after the trial. No one there would talk to us, and they didn't release a statement to the press. What the state does with this is, I think, even more interesting now, knowing that it was so close for a not guilty verdict. A lot of people have asked if they decided to move forward. I don't know. What do you think?
I think they almost have to after the conversations they've had with the family, but they really do need to think, is this really worth it? I was able to speak to Edwin and Edric afterwards, and I think their reactions were sort of tempered because they probably knew this was coming early in the day. But outside, they were buoyed. They were not ready to give up the fight. Clearly not the verdict you guys are hoping for. So what do you do now? You go home, you regroup, and then what happens?
We know for Brian, we have to be there. Just like he would have been here for us the same way every day, steadfast, we got to be the same, and that's what we'll do,
I feel confident that we will prevail. I feel confident, but it's just unfortunate it's not today. But when the next one comes, I think new set of eyes and the new jurors, they should be able to see this, and I think we'll prevail.
I think when I look back at this trial in many, many years, I think something that'll come to mind is that the trial pretty much played out like our podcast did. Same witnesses, same line of questions, same story. But what the jury didn't hear was all the things that we reported on, which they weren't allowed to hear. How do we reconcile the fact that this jury came to this verdict without even hearing all the other information which wasn't allowed? I think I'm in the exact same place I was 2 weeks ago. I didn't know then. I didn't know what the verdict would be. I didn't know what the truth was. And I still don't know any of those things. We've heard as much evidence as anyone on the planet, except maybe Miami-Dade police. And I still couldn't tell you beyond a reasonable doubt that Rashaun Jones was there and he pulled the trigger.
We started reporting this story in 2017, more than a decade after Brian's murder. At the time, we hoped we could help solve the case and to bring his family some closure. But then the focus of our story shifted. It became more about the investigation itself, all the ways Miami-Dade police had dropped the ball. We tried to use our reporting to hold the police accountable for those shortcomings. We wanted law enforcement to do a better job. But once you publish a story, you can never control the consequences.
There was a lot more attention on the case than there was before.
Andel Brown is a criminal defense attorney in Miami. He started out in the public defender's office, so he's seen how Miami-Dade police and prosecutors operate up close.
What I think the detectives wanted was a mouthpiece to help them get the public to cooperate and come forward with information. ESPN became more of a magnifying glass
And I think that scrutiny is a lot of pressure.
Now, in the wake of a mistrial and all the failures from the police and prosecution, Brown finds himself thinking about Brian's family.
I can imagine it is very difficult for them to see the legal process play out. And you have to balance that against the fact that Rashaun Jones deserves a fair trial. And an accusation doesn't mean that he's guilty. The Pata family doesn't deserve to be without answers. Rashaun Jones doesn't deserve to go to prison for something he didn't do. The reality of it is that the people investigating, the people prosecuting, have to do a good job. They have to look at all the leads. They have to go wherever the evidence takes them. And if they didn't do that, then it's a disservice to both sides of the equation.
If Brian had been white, how would this be any different?
If Brian had been white and a star football player, I don't think you would have had to wait 5, 10, 15 years for the interest to reach a fever pitch. Out the gate, everybody would have to provide answers for what happened to this star football player.
Rashaun and Brian had been players for one of the most legendary college football programs in history. Having your name on that roster, especially for a young black man, almost guaranteed some kind of opportunity.
Being on those Miami teams meant so much in not only getting to the NFL, but in your value in that city. You can say I was on that 2004, 2005, 2006 Miami team. There's value to that cachet. It meant something.
Dominique Foxworth is a sports commentator and a former NFL player. He'd also played college football around the same time Rashaun and Brian did.
You assume that someone who is at college playing football, it feels like you're out. It feels like you've cleared the most dangerous part or the most challenging part of your life. It feels unfair, honestly, to be so close to having the dreams that you want realized, or at least having the doors of opportunity opened as a young man in his early 20s with some connections and some success, to have that door slammed shut, whether it's because you were shot to death or because you're on trial again and again for the murder of your teammate.
That Miami Herald reporter, Manny Navarro, had been thinking about the doors that could have opened for Brian if he hadn't died so young. Navarro told us he thought Brian would end up on TV. It's hard not to remember that, seeing Foxworth, who is now regularly on TV, but 2 decades ago, was just like Rashaun and Brian, playing college football, hoping to pursue bigger things.
I think I do identify with both of them, but as much as I identify with any young black football player, so much of their experience is something that I'm familiar with. We've all been in bar fights when we were in college as athletes. We felt like we were targets for that. That happened. What that could have escalated to, who knows? We all have had relationships where somebody had been with someone else and there was cheating and there was this and other. I was in the middle of those things too. What those could have escalated to, I had no idea. So while I don't think of myself as someone who was ever courting anything like that, it's always right next to you.
For almost 10 years, we'd been combing through the details of Brian's life with one question in mind: who had killed him? But in the world where Brian was alive, where he'd made it up the stairs to his apartment that night, the details of his life would be just that. Details that were private. The sex, the parties, the brawls, the kinds of things that could happen to a football player at a Division I school. And that would be true for Rashaun, too. He'd be a man who'd failed a drug test a few times in college, who'd gotten into some fights, who is now a father. Of course, that isn't the world we're in. In this world, Brian is dead, and Rashaun Jones, who has been in jail for the last 5 years, is scheduled to go to trial again. When a mistrial happens in Florida, the state has 90 days to bring the case for a retrial. Rashaun's retrial is already slated for later this spring. He'll face a jury, 6 new faces, 6 new people who get to decide if he murdered Brian. And maybe this time those 6 people will come to a unanimous decision. But even if they do decide what really happened here, there's a hard truth we have come to accept. We may never know, really know, who killed Brian Patta. Oh, and one other thing. I've been emailing that notorious con man, George Jones.
Whatever you want to name, you want to call me, a capitalist, opportunist, whatever. But when I saw the opportunity, I was like, I'll give it a shot.
He knows there's going to be another trial, and he's told me he'll testify. For the right deal, of course. And George isn't just talking to me. He reached out to Edwin, Brian's brother. His message was direct. Did you hear ESPN's podcast where Rashaun confessed to me? Then he dropped his cell phone number and left Edwin with 4 words. Rashaun needs to pay. And so it begins again. Murder at the U is based on reporting by me, Paula Levine, and Dan Arruda, with support from Scott Frankel, Elizabeth Merrill, and ESPN's investigative unit. Our senior producer is Matt Frasica. Our senior editorial producer is Preethi Varathan. Our associate producers are Megan Coyle and Gus Navarro, with Isabella Seaman. Our story editor is Adiza Egan. Additional editing by Ben Weber and Mike Drago. Our archival producer is Matthew Fisher. Our line producer is Kath Sankey. Production managers are Jason Schwartz and Sheena Williams-Zamuda. Production support from Dean Gavo, Jorge Boza, Alan Jermolinsky, Carl Gaffney, Carolyn Hepburn, and Phil Guidry. Fact-checking by John Mastroberardino. Original music and sound design by Ryan Ross Smith. Production assistants are Diamante McKelvey, Anthony Salas, Avia Owensby, and Declan McMahon. Rights and clearances by Jennifer Thorpe and Cal Griffith. Legal by Tamara Laurie and Peter Shear. Mike Drago is Senior Deputy Editor of Investigative Journalism. Chris Buckle is Vice President of ESPN Investigative, Enterprise, and Digital Journalism. Jose Morales is the Executive Producer of Original Content. David Roberts is Executive Editor of ESPN Sports, News, and Entertainment. For 30 for 30 podcast, Preethi Varathan is Head of Audio. Ben Weber is Senior Director for 30 for 30. Marcia Cook, Brian Lockhart, Heather Anderson, and Burke Magnus are Executive Producers for 30 for 30. This podcast was developed by Tara Nadolny and Cynthia Parabello. To listen to more sports series like this one, search 30 for 30 Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts or find us at 30for30podcast.com. Thanks for listening.